I still remember the moment like it happened yesterday, even though it's been months. I walked into the kitchen that morning, coffee in hand, expecting the usual clatter of cereal bowls, the soft hum of the dishwasher, maybe the low murmur of a YouTube video in the background, and instead it was quiet. Too quiet. Too quiet for a house that had a 20-year-old son and his girlfriend practically living in it. And then I noticed his side of the bedroom was empty. His PlayStation, a few clothes folded haphazardly, his backpack left slouched against the wall, all gone. My heart sank, but not just for the messiness of it. There was a sting, a sharper bite, that someone I had raised, someone I had invested so much time and energy into, could vanish without a word. At first, I thought maybe he was at his girlfriend's place, maybe out running errands, but hours passed, then a day, then multiple days. And when he did show up that one time, it was just to grab some clothes and his PlayStation, moving like a shadow through the hallway without even glancing at me or his father. That was when the whispers started trickling in. The quiet rumors that made my stomach churn. He was telling everyone we kicked him out. We, his parents, the people who had spent years shaping the person he was supposed to become, were now being painted as the villains in his story. And it wasn't just hurtful, it was baffling, because in our home, we had always tried to teach him the principles of responsibility, accountability, and respect. Had we really been the *** holes he was making us out to be? Our story starts a few years earlier, the fall after high school graduation. My son, barely 18, was stepping out of the bubble of high school and into a world he hadn't quite learned to navigate yet. He wasn't going to college, at least not immediately, and we wanted to give him a soft landing without shielding him from reality. We sat him down, outlined our expectations, and explained our plan. $500 a month for rent. But here's the catch, the rent wasn't a penalty. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about building a foundation. Every dollar would go into a savings account under his name, a nest egg to give him a solid start when he was ready to leave the house and face adulthood. We tried to frame it as a partnership, a way to learn how to manage money while still having a safety net. He listened, nodded, even smiled. But there was a tension there, an impatience we couldn't ignore. He wasn't excited about it. He was tolerating it, a necessary inconvenience in his mind. And over the months, that tension grew. The payments came irregularly, sporadic, and sometimes not at all. Each time we reminded him, there was a shrug, a muttered excuse, a half-hearted promise. At first, we chalked it up to him adjusting to the natural ebb and flow of a young adult learning responsibility. But soon it became obvious. The system wasn't working. If he wasn't willing to work with it, the real turning point came the summer before this current ordeal. We had a vacation planned, the kind where the world fades and the days stretch endlessly with nothing but sun and laughter. And for emergencies, I left him my credit card, explicitly telling him, only if something serious comes up. Nothing else. I thought it was a reasonable arrangement. I thought we had made the rules clear. But reality, as it often does, betrayed expectation. By the time we returned, the credit card statement was staggering $3,000 spent, none of it for emergencies. Clothes, food, gadgets, things he wanted rather than needed. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was a breach of trust that I hadn't anticipated would feel so heavy, so personal. We confronted him. Calmly, initially, even though my insides were knotted with frustration. I explained again that he had misused the card, that he needed to pay it back, and he nodded. He promised. He shrugged. And then, nothing. The money didn't come. The rent he had promised to contribute to his savings account barely trickled in. Months passed. Conversations devolved into arguments, and arguments into avoidance. And all the while, the principle remained the same. He needed to take responsibility for his actions, his choices, and the consequences that came with them. By April, enough was enough. We laid it out clearly. Pay back half the money he had spent without permission, the $1,500. We'll move out. Not maybe, not we'll see. We gave him a deadline of 3 months, a fair period to make amends. May came, nothing. June came, nothing. And then July rolled in. And I tried to have a final conversation, a final check-in. Are you looking for a new apartment? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral, even though my hands were clenched around my phone. Because your deadline to pay us back is 1 month away. The response was explosive, screaming accusations, his voice cracking and rising. And then, just like that, the decision was made. He and his girlfriend packed their things and left the next morning, vanishing without a word. No discussion, no handshake, no acknowledgement of the financial mess left behind. And the quiet that followed wasn't just silence, it was a vacuum, a physical ache in the house where laughter and banter once lived. What hurt most wasn't just the money. It was the narrative he began to weave outside our home, that we had kicked him out, that we were cruel, unreasonable, asterisk holes in his version of the story. It stung in a way that was disproportionate to the dollars lost. How could he take the narrative of our care, our structure, our intent to teach, and turn it into an image of villainy? And yet, I had to face it. If he believed it, if the people around him believed it, then our truth was meaningless outside these walls. Even now, months later, I find myself questioning the story from his perspective. Did we handle it poorly? Were we too strict? Too unemotional? Or did he simply refuse to face the consequences of choices he had made freely every step of the way? It's hard not to spiral through these questions, to balance the scales in my head between parental love and accountability, yet, for all the emotional turbulence, for all the quiet dinners and the empty side of the bed, I know this: the rules we set were reasonable, fair, and rooted in preparation for adulthood. We weren't trying to punish him. We were trying to guide him. And maybe that guidance wasn't wrapped in the sugar of indulgence or the cushions of leniency. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe that's why he's painting us as villains. Why the world outside sees a different story than the one inside these walls. Still, there's a strange clarity in this moment of reflection. The kitchen is quiet again, yes, but now it's a quiet that allows thought, a quiet that forces introspection. And for all the frustration, all the betrayal, there's an understanding that life is messy, that lessons are often learned in absence, in confrontation, in the stark truth of reality. He's out of the house. He's spreading his story. And the question remains, how do we reclaim the narrative without turning this into a battle of ego, without letting bitterness fester into resentment? That, I realize, is the beginning of the next chapter of this story. The months leading up to his departure were a slow burn of frustration and disbelief, each day layering one more brick onto the wall between us. It wasn't just the money though. The $3,000 he'd spent on my credit card without permission still felt like a punch in the gut. It was the principle. It was the repeated disregard for boundaries we had tried to set from the very beginning. Every late payment, every excuse, Every shrug of indifference was like a signal flare, flashing across the sky. I don't care about your rules, your guidance, or the trust you've built. And we watched helplessly as the structure we had carefully built crumbled, brick by brick, not because it was weak, but because he refused to engage with it. Our home, once a space of collaboration and learning, had transformed into a battlefield of passive aggression and tension. Mornings started with sighs and half-hearted greetings. Conversations about mundane things, groceries, chores, schedules became veiled interrogations, a careful dance around explosive potential. I'd catch him sneaking extra purchases online, and my stomach would knot. I'd remind him of the rent he owed, and he would look at me as though I were an adversary, a gatekeeper demanding tribute for no reason. It was exhausting. Every interaction felt like walking through a minefield, uncertain which word would set off an emotional explosion. The tipping point, of course, was the credit card incident. I had entrusted him with a responsibility, a test of judgment, and he had failed spectacularly. $3,000 for clothes he didn't need, food he could have bought responsibly, gadgets that added no value. It wasn't the money, it was the breach of trust. And when we asked for repayment, when we explained that the money had to be reimbursed, he shrugged. No remorse, no plan, just a faint, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that somehow, maybe, he had overstepped. But no action followed. It was infuriating, disheartening, and yet predictable. We had seen the pattern of avoidance and indifference grow since the day he moved in as a young adult who wasn't ready to face responsibility. We tried to hold him accountable. We tried to be clear, concise, and fair. 3 months to repay half of the unauthorized charges. A fair deadline, giving him time and space to rectify the situation. But the months passed with the same emptiness. May brought no payment, June brought none. And with each passing day, the distance grew not just physically, but emotionally. A widening chasm fueled by resentment and stubbornness. I began to notice a change in the way he interacted, not just with us, but with the world outside our home. He grew defensive, his tone sharp, dismissive. The girlfriend, once a peripheral figure, began asserting her presence more forcefully, reinforcing his positions, amplifying the tension. It was a pressure cooker, and I could feel it ticking down to inevitable detonation. When I finally confronted him in early July, I tried to remain calm, even though my patience was thin. "Are you looking for a new apartment?" I asked, voice measured, almost casual. "Because your deadline to pay us back is 1 month away." The words were meant as a nudge, a gentle reminder that consequences were real, that agreements had to be honored. But instead of dialogue, I was met with a storm of anger, a flurry of accusations, the sound of frustration pouring from his mouth in waves. He didn't listen, he didn't reason, he didn't attempt compromise. He decided on the spot that leaving was the solution, that removing himself physically from the house absolved him from accountability. The morning he left was surreal. It wasn't dramatic, not in the way you see in movies with slammed doors and shouted goodbyes. It was quiet, almost ghostly. Boxes stacked neatly in the living room, clothes folded or stuffed into bags. A hasty farewell from a girlfriend who barely made eye contact, and then they were gone, just like that. No conversation, no acknowledgement, no plan to repay what had been misappropriated. The air hung heavy with the absence of voices, laughter, argument, everything that had filled the house before. And then the rumors began. Friends, acquaintances, neighbors, somehow the story shifted. He told people that we had kicked him out, that we were unreasonable, cruel, even harsh. The image of us as the villains crystallized in his narrative, while we were left standing, invisible, as the story's unseen victims. It was maddening, this distortion of reality. Here was the truth, plain and simple. We had given him every chance to make amends, every opportunity to demonstrate responsibility. We had been patient, clear, and fair. But somehow, in the translation of our actions to his narrative, we became monsters, the antagonists of a story we didn't recognize. I struggled with anger, yes, but also with a strange, creeping sadness. Was our approach too strict, too unemotional? Should we have coddled him, smoothed over the financial missteps, ignored the breaches of trust? And yet, deep down, I knew that yielding would have been a disservice. Life isn't forgiving for irresponsibility, and sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones learned through discomfort and consequence. But empathy battled with frustration in an endless cycle. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand recognition of the truth. But the truth, I realized, wasn't mine to enforce beyond these walls. Once he left, the narrative was his. Even contact after he moved out was strained. He barely responded to texts, the occasional curt message that offered nothing but the illusion of communication. We continued to pay for his cell phone not because we were obligated, but because severing support completely felt unnecessarily punitive. His car insurance, that ended immediately after he left, a small but significant boundary that reminded us we couldn't carry him indefinitely. Each interaction, or lack thereof, underscored the distance that had grown. A chasm created not by circumstance, but by choices and avoidance. And yet, I kept reflecting on the decisions leading up to this moment. We had tried to teach him independence, accountability, and foresight. We had given him the tools to succeed and the safety net to make mistakes without catastrophic consequence. We had laid out expectations, clear and concise, and provided the time to meet them. The fact that he rejected every step of that guidance didn't make us cruel-lit, made him unwilling to confront reality. Still, watching him present a distorted version of events to friends and family, painting us as unreasonable, was painful. The truth, it seemed, existed only inside the walls of our home, inaccessible to the outside world. It's a strange, isolating feeling to be vilified by someone you've loved and nurtured. And yet, this experience forced a kind of clarity, a brutal honesty with myself about the boundaries we'd set, the patience we'd exercised, and the fairness of our expectations. There was no joy in the estrangement, no satisfaction in being right. But there was understanding, a recognition that the past months had tested both our patience and our principles, and that the choices we made, though difficult, were consistent with the values we tried to instill. The narrative outside our home would continue, shaped by his words, by his interpretation. Friends, acquaintances, and casual observers would see the story we couldn't control. But inside, within the confines of the house, the truth was unambiguous. We had given him every chance, had been clear about expectations, had been fair yet firm. And now, left with silence and rumors, the challenge was to reconcile our role as parents, the mistakes made, and the boundaries maintained with the reality that some battles are fought in the mind and perception of others, not with facts or evidence. The aftermath of his departure settled over the house like a thick, suffocating fog. Days stretched into weeks, each one marked by an echoing absence where once his voice and laughter had resided. It wasn't just the physical void, it was the emotional landscape that had shifted so abruptly. Every corner of the home seemed to whisper reminders. The empty side of the bed, the PlayStation gone from the living room, his backpack missing from the hallway. And yet, the most painful reminder was the story he was telling to everyone else. The one where we were the villains, the parents who had kicked him out. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself, it doesn't matter what he says outside. We know the truth. But that mantra faltered under the weight of human pride and the relentless repetition of his narrative. Friends called, hesitant, unsure which side to believe. Family members raised eyebrows in quiet sympathy, asking questions that made me feel defensive. And worse, there was a gnawing internal question. Had we really been harsh? Too strict? Was our patience insufficient? Our expectations unreasonable? I had to replay every conversation, every warning, every deadline in my mind to find clarity, to reaffirm that our actions had been fair and intentional, guided by a desire to teach responsibility, not to punish. And then came the realization, if he was going to present a skewed version of events to the world, the only way to reclaim our narrative was through action, through boundaries, and through quiet but deliberate reinforcement of truth. We weren't going to argue in public. We weren't going to chase after apologies. Instead, we began with ourselves. We tightened our boundaries. No more automatic support. No more tolerance for excuses. We had to model the accountability we had always preached, to demonstrate that actions have consequences, and that trust, once broken, isn't easily restored. Paying his cell phone bill became a conscious act of balance. We continued, yes, but only because it didn't feel punitive and allowed us to maintain a thread of connection, a rope dangling into the void of silence he had created. Stopping his car insurance, however, was a definitive boundary. It was a reminder, subtle but firm, that while love endures, responsibility does not. Choices have outcomes. Freedom without accountability is a dangerous illusion. And he had stepped squarely into that realm, believing that departure absolved him of obligation. There were moments of quiet reflection when I confronted the emotional reality of our estrangement. Parenting isn't just about raising children in comfort. It's about preparing them for the unforgiving world outside. We hadn't failed in our duty as parents by demanding responsibility, we had fulfilled it. The problem wasn't our approach. It was his unwillingness to engage with it. But the human heart is complicated. Even when you know you are right, the ache of misunderstanding, the pain of being vilified by someone you love, lingers. I found myself replaying the summer's events. The $3,000 spent without permission, the unpaid rent, the ignored deadlines, searching for any sign that we could have done something differently. Some action that might have prevented this fracture, yet the truth remained unchanged. We had been fair, clear, and consistent. And that consistency, though it seemed harsh to him in the moment, was a reflection of a deeper principle. Life doesn't bend for evasion or negligence. We weren't *** holes for enforcing rules. We were parents enforcing responsibility, a concept he hadn't yet internalized. The twist of his narrative, his portrayal of us as cruel, was simply a reflection of his perspective, shaped by embarrassment, anger, and perhaps fear of facing the consequences of his actions. There was, however, an unexpected clarity that emerged from this chaos. The absence he left forced us to confront the larger truth about parenting and independence. We realized that boundaries are not merely punitive, they are protective, shaping the moral and practical framework that young adults need to navigate life. His departure, though painful, had crystallized this lesson. Love without boundaries can breed entitlement. Guidance without expectation can foster negligence. And while it was difficult to accept, his choice to leave and propagate a false narrative was, in a sense, an education for us as well. A brutal but instructive reminder of the limits of influence and control. In the weeks that followed, we adjusted our household routines, reinforcing independence, communication, and mutual respect among those remaining in the home. The silence, though initially oppressive, transformed into a space for reflection and recalibration. Each unpaid bill, each neglected promise, became a teaching moment, reframed as a story for ourselves, a cautionary tale about trust, responsibility, and the consequences of taking advantage of kindness. It was not revenge in the dramatic sense, but a quiet, deliberate reclamation of our narrative through disciplined action, integrity, and consistency. And then came the internal reckoning, the reconciliation of hurt, anger, and clarity. We recognized that the world outside would always have differing interpretations of our story. Friends might side with him, neighbors might nod sympathetically at his version of events, and social circles would whisper, speculating about fairness and cruelty. But what mattered, ultimately, was our truth, the integrity of our actions, and the knowledge that we had done everything reasonable to prepare him for adulthood. We had given him opportunity, guidance, and the tools to succeed. His choice to ignore those lessons, to leave abruptly, and to twist the story was his responsibility, not ours. There is a subtle satisfaction in this realization, a sense of quiet victory that doesn't come from confrontation or punishment, but from living authentically within the principles we value. We had not yielded to irrationality, fear, or emotional manipulation. We had upheld the standards we set, reinforced boundaries, and demonstrated that accountability is non-negotiable. That, perhaps, is the true revenge, not in retaliation, but in the steady, unwavering embodiment of the values we hold dear, the ones we tried to teach him from the beginning. And so the story continues, not in dramatic confrontations or shouted apologies, but in the quiet knowledge that we acted fairly, that our intentions were clear, and that life will, in time, provide him with the lessons he currently refuses to accept. The rumors, the distorted tales, and the whispers of cruelty cannot erase the truth that exists within these walls, the truth we lived by and continue to live by. In the end, the ultimate resolution isn't vindication, it's the calm confidence that we raised our voices in clarity, upheld our principles, and trusted that responsibility, sooner or later, finds its way home.